Let us turn our Bibles to Deuteronomy chapter 10. Deuteronomy chapter 11. Deuteronomy chapter 11. Over the weeks as I was praying, the Lord would show to me what to speak on in the morning devotions. I was led to speak on obedience. Obedience. Well, the theme is on walking. Obedience will be an important aspect of walking with God. Obedience. So let us turn to Deuteronomy chapter 11. Now I want us to just read verses 26 to 28 together. 26 to 28. Deuteronomy chapter 11, verses 26 to 28. Let's read together. Behold, I set before you this day a blessing and a curse. A blessing if ye obey the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you this day. And a curse if you will not obey the commandments of the Lord your God, but turn aside out of the way which I command you this day, to go after other gods which you have not known. May God bless the reading of His Word. Now these verses, if you want to talk about obedience, these verses are probably what often comes to people's mind. And I wonder, as you read these three verses, what is in your heart? How do you feel? Because as we read them, we always say, yes, blessings for obedience, curses for disobedience. And then very often in our hearts, we already form certain picture, certain emotions occur in us. Say, oh, obedience, I better obey. If I don't obey, there'll be curses in my life. How do you feel each time you come across this passage? How do you feel each time you hear people talking about God pronouncing blessings and curses depending on your obedience? How do you feel? Now, I'm going to, by God's grace, speak on chapter 10 and 11, but I want to read 11 first, and these verses first. When I was in my younger days, I loved to read novels. Before I was saved, I read a lot of novels, and certain writers, they write novels this way. They will begin with a scene of an event or something happening to someone. And that's the beginning. The opening scene is like that. And then he begins. Then he will go back in time and start from the beginning. What eventually led to this particular thing that is happening to this person? And I especially like novels that are written like that, because you just wonder, how did it all lead to this particular event in the person's life? The reason why I want to read this first is, I think many of us, when we read these verses, we form certain pictures in our mind, but we fail to realize the context of it. When I read this kind of novels, then as I read, I keep wondering what the person was feeling, what the person went through, and eventually when the person is in that situation, what was in his heart. And then as you read, the build-up occurs. And very often, what I read in the beginning, I develop certain emotions about the scene. I even make certain judgments about that event. But when I finish the novel, and then the scene comes back again, my perspective of that scene can be totally different. My perspective of that event can be changed totally. My feelings about what was happening can be very different. So by God's grace, I want to cover the context about these verses. In fact, recently someone asked me, say, it's very difficult. I struggle. And yet, I have problems in my life. I'm sure I'm cursed. I'm cursed by God because I'm disobedient. And then the person was just very upset. And it seems like a life of obedience to this person is just absolutely about fear of being cursed. It was just simply a life that was concerned about not offending God, and God is just waiting to punish this person. Because the person read this verse and said, "This is what God is going to do to me." Why is the person obeying God like that? I ask myself. Why do we obey God? How is your obedience? How is it? Why do you obey God? So by God's grace, over the next few days, we want to look at who we are obeying. Then we want to look at why we obey. Then we want to look at what happens when we obey. And then the last message, God willing, it would be about, therefore, how to obey rightly. Don't you love to be able to obey with a joy in your heart? In fact, a thrill to say, I can't wait to obey God. But when you read this passage in the beginning, just remember what you were feeling. All right? So now, let's look at chapter 10. Before these verses were penned, there was a context to it. There were things that were happening. We have to understand those things, and then by the time we reach these three verses at the end, I hope you will see it differently. Now look at chapter 10. Chapter 10, verse 12. Let me read to you. Chapter 10, verse 12. Now here is Moses telling the people, "And now, Israel, what doth the Lord thy God require of thee, but to fear the Lord thy God, and to walk in all his ways, and to love him, and to serve the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul." Now, Moses made this statement before he arrived at those three verses. What was the context of this situation? This would be, in chapter 10, would be the second giving of the law. How do we know that? Look at chapter 10, verse 1. God tells Moses, remember Moses threw and broke the first two tablets, and now we have chapter 10, verse 1. "At that time the Lord said unto me, Hew thee 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and come up unto me into the mount, and make thee an ark of wood." Now this would be in verse 2, "And I will write on the tables the words that were in the first tables which thou breakest, and thou shalt put them in the ark." So that is the context. Remember why Moses broke the first 2 sets? Because the children of Israel rebelled. The children of Israel disobeyed God. We have covered that. We studied that. Because of that, now they end up with this scene. Moses now comes to them second time, and tells them, "You remember, you disobeyed God. Remember what you did with the golden calf. This time, know this." He just pleaded with them. If you read, it's almost like Moses' tone is pleading. "And now, Israel, now, what does the Lord thy God require of you?" What does he require of you? Moses was more like pleading than scolding. He said, "Now you think about what God has done for you, what he's requiring of you." And please note also, he says, Israel. The children of Israel, have they gone into the promised land yet? Are there a nation called Israel? Not yet. But yet at this point, he would already use the word Israel, call them by the nation's name. And in fact, in here, you would see capital Lord in verse 12, used 3 times. Moses would begin pleading with them based on God's covenant. His covenantal name, we've always emphasized that. And he calls them Israel. Right from the beginning, he wants to wake them up and realize that you are God's covenantal people. You are his chosen people. Why would you behave like that towards your covenantal God? So he says, what is so difficult? Is it so demanding of your covenantal God to require of these things of you, to walk in all his ways, to fear him, to love him, to serve him with all your heart? Is it so much to demand of you? You look at here, again, if your state of mind is one of You do not appreciate what God has done for you. Then when you read these verses, read chapter 10, verse 12, and then you read these words, wow, to fear God, I must fear Him. And then to walk, not just walk in His ways, but all His ways. Everything He tells you, right to the dot, everything, you must walk in them. And it doesn't stop there. And you must love Him. Have you ever been commanded to love someone? I demand that you love me. And He says that, to love Him. And to serve Him. Doesn't stop there. I must serve Him some more. And serve Him how? With all thy heart, with all thy soul. Wow, these are great expectations to obey God. In my mind, very often there are three kinds of Christians. When we say obey God, the first kind can be like that. Okay, I'm supposed to, I will, as long as daddy and mommy is around, we stay in the chalet, as long as my chalet mates are around, okay, I obey. Outwardly we obey. We go around camp, we are obedient outwardly. But the moment you go back to your room, you change. You say, no one is watching. I will listen to what I want to listen. I will watch what I want to watch. I will do what I want to do. I will think about what I want to think about. I'll behave as I wish when you're alone. So that's one kind of people when it comes to obedience. Outwardly, that's it. Put up a show. And then there's another kind that when they read verses like that, wow, fear Him, love Him, serve Him, obey and do everything that He says. Another kind will be like that. They hear, but in their heart, they don't even, they may outwardly do a lot of things. They have checklists in their life. They check everything. I must pray. I must do devotion. I must dress properly. I must not love the world. I must, a lot of things. I must not this, I must do this. And they will actually do it. But actually in their hearts, they are bucking against it all the time. They're resisting it. They're unhappy about it. But they will do it. Now, when that happens, we will find that it doesn't last very long. In fact, isn't that the nightmare of most parents? You wonder, your child is obeying you now, under your authority, and then they obey you. But you wonder, for how long? You wonder when they're alone, when they grow up, when they go out of the house, what are they doing? How would they be? Would they last? Will they fall in time? You wonder. So there's this group of Christians that are like that. And then there's another group of Christians that is like that. They hear the word. They read verses like that. I must obey God. I must love Him. I must serve Him. Walk in all His ways. In their heart there is a welling desire. Yes, I want to do that. But at the same time, they also struggle. They feel, I want to, but I find that it's very difficult. And they feel very sad. And they are unhappy about that part of their lives. Which type of Christian are you? Which type of person are you whenever you hear the word obey? Which kind? Which kind? In fact, when some of us were speaking last night, a person said, oh, I can't wait for heaven to come. I wish rapture will happen immediately after the camp. So we're enjoying the camp now. Then as soon as the camp is over, okay, let's continue, but let's continue in heaven. Right? Rapture and go to heaven and continue this wonderful fellowship. And I say, why? Then the person says, because I'm so fed up of sin. I'm so fed up of temptations. So the person wants to obey God, but is fed up. Is fed up. Few kinds. What about you? Which kind are you? What happens to your heart when you read chapter 10, verse 12? What happens when you read chapter 11, verses 26 to 28? What is going through your heart and your mind? Young person, are you the kind that says, as soon as I'm out of the house, as soon as I'm out from under my parents, as soon as I get a job, I will leave church. I will not do this anymore. Well, if you're like that, then you better check your heart. You better check your salvation. If all this while you obey God simply because you have to, and there's no desire in you at all, you do obey simply because you're afraid that your parents will not give you pocket money, will take away your privileges, you better check. A true child of God will have some, if not much, degree of desire to obey God. When they read verses like that, they will say, I want to. How? Now, Moses having said this to them, probably in his mind, when I read this, I put myself in his shoes. Now, if I were to tell a group of people who have just disobeyed God miserably, what can I do? After telling them to do all this, you will see how Moses will begin to plead with them. He would even now begin to present arguments to them. He would now begin to present a perspective to them to try and help them understand why he said what he said in verse 12. So let's look. Now in verse 18. Now he says, verse 13, chapter 10, verse 13. He says, to keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes, which I command thee this day for thy good. Now first of all, he says it's for your good. We'll talk about that under why we obey God. He says for your good. For your good. But with that, he quickly moves on to the next thing. Chapter 10 and chapter 11 is going to be different focus. We'll see chapter 11 tomorrow. It's going to be a different focus. He will shift his focus. But in chapter 10, his focus is this. Look at verse 14. Behold, the heaven and the heaven of heavens is the Lord's, thy God, the earth also with all that therein is. Now he says this. Now he presents who God is to them. That's why this morning is about who are we obeying? Who are you obeying? You have to realize that Moses wanted them to realize that. Verse 14, behold. And I say, look, pay attention, behold. Don't skip this point. I want you to realize this. Pay attention now. Behold, the heaven and the heaven of heavens is the Lord's. He wants us to know that the universe, heaven of heavens, the universe belongs to this God. Who is this God? The Lord, thy God. He is your covenantal God. And He's your covenantal Lord, and He's your God. This God that possesses everything in this universe. And he says, further he says, the earth also with all therein is. Whatever you see on earth belongs to God. He is the owner of all things. He's the supreme one. In other words, he's trying to paint this picture. He is supreme above everything on earth, everything even in the heavens. He is supreme, and everything He owns. He created them. He wants them to realize who this God is that is saying, obey me, follow after me. Not only it is for your good, but realize who is speaking to you. Then he goes down, he says, verse 15, only the Lord hath a delight in thy fathers, verse 15, to love them. And He chose you, their seed after them, even you above all people, as it is this day. What is he saying? He said this is, first he presented who this Almighty God is. Then he said, do you know that this God, He chose you? That's why he's now going to talk again about their covenantal relationship. He chose you. He made a covenant with your fathers. Look at verse 15. Only the Lord had delight in your fathers. He says, it is simply because this God of the universe, the Almighty One, the supreme ruler, He simply had a delight in your ancestors. And He made a covenant with them. Verse 15, he said, to love them. He said He chose to love them. He chose them. He chose them. He did not need them. In other words, you and I have to realize this. This is the God of the universe. He don't need you and I. He doesn't need our company. He doesn't need anything from us. He doesn't even need us to glorify Him. We are unimportant to Him. But yet He says He loved. He chose to love. He just delighted in loving your fathers. Not that they were good, not that they were a great people, not that they were special, not that they were loving towards God. No, he said he's simply only the Lord had a delight. That is all. But remember who I'm talking about. I'm not talking about someone who is your equal. I'm talking about, not even talking about someone who's very great. I'm talking about God of the universe. And then he says, not only he loved your fathers, chose them, and he says, chose their seed after them. In other words, you all. You all. Not only them, he chose you all, their seed. We too are God's people. Do you and I realize that? This morning, as you read these verses, obey. You have to realize who is speaking. You and I have to come with an understanding that when we obey God, it is, without even talking about these verses, it is our duty. It is simply required of us because He is the Almighty God. You have to realize that. Sometimes we say, okay, God, you love me, you chose me, you died for me. Okay, I think I should obey you. Do you realize that even if God did not do anything for you and I, just by the fact that the heaven of heavens is His and everything that is in the earth is His, including you and I, His creatures, by that alone, we ought to bow in humble worship, in thankfulness. Even He said, I condemn all of you to hell. I'm the Almighty God. We will still need to bow, and one day the unbelievers will, or every knee will bow, and we'll have to acknowledge, truly you are God. I deserve nothing. Truly we need to bow to you. We need to submit to you. You are the supreme authority. Just by that fact alone, just by verse 15 alone, verse 14 alone, he says, you already should do everything that He expects that you do. You can't even buck against Him. I was sharing at BBK. Just a couple of days back, I subscribed to morning devotions because I want to see what these people write. So this person write, the title is this, and this site always have these catchy titles. And the title was this: I speak back to God. I speak back to God. And what does she speak back to God? She says, I will tell God, you hurt my feelings. You hurt my feelings. And he said, the reason why I can speak back to God is because I know God can handle it. You know the very, very low view of God? The very low understanding of who God is and who she comes before? That is our problem. Very often, we think that when we obey God, we are doing Him a favor. We are showing Him gratitude. Yes, we should show Him gratitude, but even if we don't have any, we must obey. But you see, after Moses said verse 14, he added verse 15 to let them know this is that God, that Almighty One, the Supreme One. But yet, do you know this is what He is to you? This is what He is to you. Then he doesn't stop there. Verse 16, he says, circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart and be no more stiff-necked. Now, with this, he reasons with them. Therefore, with this in mind, therefore, circumcise the foreskin of your heart. What is that about? He says, don't just obey God outwardly. Yes, the outward circumcision was their acceptance of God, His covenant, that they declare, I'm your covenantal people. That's a sign of their covenant. It is also the putting away of all other ways except God's way, removing all uncleanness, and declaring themselves to be a people of God. Here he continues to emphasize their covenantal relationship. And not only that, he says, no more be stiff-necked. Stop it. You think about what you just did at the bottom of Mount Sinai. Your rebellion. You better know who this God is. And you better know, and you should know in your heart what He has done for you. So he says, don't obey outwardly. Don't have all these religious outward behaviors. Have something that is truly from within you. Obedience. Now he's getting to the heart of obedience now. How do you and I obey God? Bucking against Him? Unhappily? Grudgingly? When we were sharing at when we were sharing at our chalet time together, we say, all right, we'll share one item, what we learned the most, and they were very good sharing, and most of it was about how I should not love the world, how I should walk in newness of life, I should change, So everyone was like, yes, I should change. And then someone said, but it's difficult, right? And then quickly the person, yes, it's so difficult. Right? It's true, isn't it? We want to obey. And there's this welling up desire, I must not. But sometimes on our lips, we can say, I must not this, I must not that, I must not this. Then the moment we go back, we leave camp, we reach home, what happens? Maybe before we reach home, in the car already. It was so sad, After preaching at one camp, preaching your heart out at one camp about how media has taken hold of the Christian's life. And everyone, yes, and at lunch, and everybody kept talking, yeah, I'm so glad you cover media. Then on the way back on the bus, guess what? iPad out, watching Korean movies. So fast, I said, before I even reached back home, already on the bus. But in camp, yeah. Moses was trying to get to the heart of obedience. He said, think about this. Don't have this just outward religiosity. Even outwardly you can do all these things, but I say the heart of obedience must come from deep within you and I. And I pray that at the end of this series of morning devotion, we will see more of this. Because I have a deep concern that as I look around, many of you, myself included, serving God now, where will we be? Where will we be? Will you be at camp next year? Will you still serve the Lord with such zeal, with such fervency? Will you still desire the things of God? Will you still be walking in all His ways in obedience? 1 year's time, 2 years' time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time? Haven't we seen many who were in our midst, who loved God, who were in camp, very zealous? Are they still in our midst? No more. Could it be because the obedience in the heart was always one that was just an outward circumcision? That's all? Will it last? And I looked at the young persons that were saying all this. You could see the glint in their eye, the desire. But the moment they say, but it's difficult, right? Immediately it comes out from it's so difficult. So let's see next. What does Moses continue to do? Verse 17. Now he says, he comes back again. Verse 17. He represents another case. He reinforces his point of who God is. Verse 17. Because the Lord your God is God of gods, the Lord of lords, a great God, a mighty and a terrible, which regardeth not persons, nor taketh reward. Now he doesn't stop there. He doesn't say he's the supreme one, creator of heavens and earth. He owns everything, including you and I. We should obey him by right. Now he goes further. He wants to say that the Lord your God. He again says this is your covenantal God. He's not just God. He is the Lord, your God. And who is this God? He's the God of gods, the Lord of lords. You see, these people have been used to Egypt. To them, it's many gods. Many gods. Possibly this is just one God. The whole idea of local gods, as I've always said, is their thinking. But now Moses wants to lift them out. Lift them out from what they've always known about God and gods, false gods. He wants to lift them up and now let them see with the eyes of faith. Now this God is God of gods, above all that you have known. They're all false gods, above angels, above anything that you would think of as gods. He is far above them, and the Lord of lords, ruler of all master of all. Whoever you think is great, even these must obey him. These are under him. These are nothing compared to him. And then he said, a great God. It doesn't stop there. You think, okay, enough already. A great God. After they say, he's mighty, he is great, mega, great, and terrible, full of awe. Full of awe. You must know this is God. And he said, he regard not persons, nor taketh reward. Don't think that you are so great, children of Israel. He did all those miracles to deliver you. Don't think you are so great. If you disobey him, you sin. He will deal with you too. Because he is this God. You have to realize that. Then he says, verse 18, he doth execute judgment of the fatherless and widows, and loveth the stranger, and giving him food and raiment. Love ye therefore the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You see, he goes back again. This almighty God, the great God, the terrible God, full of awe, yet he loves. He not only loves you, please don't think you're so great, he loves the strangers too. This is the God that has brought you out of the land of Egypt. And please remember, you were slaves. You think about it. Do you and I deserve it? Moses tells them, did we deserve anything? Did we deserve God coming into Egypt, perform all those miracles and take us out of the land? Don't think we are so great. He loves strangers too. He loves all. You're not that important. You're not so special. But yet he says that you are his covenanted people. Why? Because they must know that they are on a mission. He says this almighty great God, he reached down, choose you as a people, give you his ways to follow. Why? Because he has a purpose for you. He has a mission for you. We know that what that is. To go, take the land from which the Messiah will come. Then he goes on again. In verse 20, he now comes back. Thou shalt fear the Lord thy God. Him shalt thou serve. Verse 20. And him thou shalt cleave and swear by his name. We will talk more about cleave another day. And then he says, he is thy praise. He is thy God. He is thy praise and he is thy God. And he hath done for thee these great things, great and terrible things, which thine eyes have seen. Verse 22, thy fathers went down into Egypt, 70 persons, and now the Lord thy God hath made thee as the stars of heaven for multitude. What is he saying? You were nothing. Only 70 souls went in, and now you're a great people, 2 to 3 million people on a mission, organized. Reminding them of their mission. And he says, look at verse 21. He is thy praise and he is thy God. In other words, the reminder is this. Because he delivered you, this almighty God delivered you, sent you on a mission, please know this, Israel. Please know this. You are on a great privilege mission. You are greatly privileged people. Of all the people that God could have chosen on this earth to do this, he did not save you because you were cute, you were loving to him. No, he chose you for a mission. And of all the people he chose you, you must realize this great, awesome, supreme God chose you to do this, to be on this mission for him. That is why he wants them to know. He wants them to know who they are expected to obey. What about you and I? We are no different. When God saved you and I, he has a mission, he has a purpose in his mind for you and I to do his will. Now, if obeying God's will is doing his commandments, then it's about obedience. You and I must have the right view of who God is in order for us to begin in our hearts to know that, God, you want me to obey you. I thank you. I'm so thankful to you, God. You chose me, you saved me, you gave me something to do for you who are the almighty and great God, the supreme ruler of this universe, yet you mean I can do something for you? Please tell me, I can't wait to obey and do it. Because after salvation, or even many years after salvation, we never realize, we never deeply in our heart, with the eyes of faith, see who God is. That's why our obedience are so shallow, so unwilling. When Lee Kuan Yew passed away, those of you who followed the news videos, you would see they interview people after people. Then many of them will be so proud to say, oh, did you know that in 1960 something, what is here, 2015, I shook Lee Kuan Yew's hand. Actually, Deacon Stephen, are you here? Deacon Stephen was just sharing the other day. You know, when I was a student here, Lee Kuan Yew came and he shook my hands. You know, we remember this great man. He came and I had the privilege to meet him and shake his hand. And then we keep talking about it, right? It's indeed a great privilege. I wish I'd had that privilege. You go to some people's house, wow, Lee Kuan Yew happened to go house to house visit. Photo, oh, the photo already turning yellow, rotting already, still pinned up on the wall, encased. The great thought of this man and the great privilege they felt that just meeting him. And then they interviewed many of those that work with him. You know, Lee Kuan Yew one day, he called me to his office, you know. And then I came in and then he sat me down. Then he spoke with me and he gave me a job in his office. Wow, I was so thankful. I can't imagine I was going to work. And I worked for Lee Kuan Yew. I worked for him. What did you do? Some menial task, like, type or photostat things for him. But he can't stop talking about, wow, like as if it's such a great job. It's Lee Kuan Yew. And then some would say, oh, you know, he took me under his wings. He guided me. He taught me. I had an engineer who was assigned to take care of Lee Kuan Yew's printer. Whenever he comes back, he'll be the center of attention at coffee break. Oh, what is he like? What did he say? What did he do? Lee Kuan Yew poured a glass of water for you. I'm serious, I'm not joking. Every time you get a call, everybody wants to be in that account, taking care of Lee Kuan Yew's printer. Because of that great view of that. These engineers, you can call him at 3 a.m. He'll be more than happy to fly down there to his house. No problem. Why? Why? Because these people, we have a great high view of men like that. But when you and I have a great high view of God, and that is what Moses is trying to tell them, your obedience will change. In fact, you can tell a lot about your obedience, my obedience. By how we obey God, it will reveal a lot about how we view who God is. Reveal a lot about how we view Him, how we respect Him, how we see Him as supreme. It will tell a lot. Sometimes we look at people like that. We give them something. Yeah? Imagine you say, I gave Lee Kuan Yew a pen, and then I saw him on TV. He was using my pen. Then, wow, we take photo, we keep. You know, it's like that, right? The world. There are pens, they advertise pens. They can sell it for thousands of dollars. Why? Because so-and-so used it before. That's what it's designed for so-and-so and so on. Then we buy it. That's what we do. We are enamored by all this. Here is the God of heaven, the supreme one, the almighty one. Even if He didn't choose you, He's saying, the fact that He say, I give you something to do. You walk in my ways. You follow me. You serve me. You know, these people, to serve Lee Kuan Yew is the greatest privilege. You saw the funeral? There are people who kneel down, crawl on the floor on their knees, elderly people crying. Just to be able to have done something for Lee Kuan Yew. Seriously, thousands of people queued up overnight until they have to open the place for extra days. Thousands of people just Lee Kuan Yew is dead already. And they interview young people even say, I just want to do one last thing for him. But he's dead. I just want to do one last thing for him. I want to put that flower on top of his coffin. And I will queue for overnight in the rain, in the cold. I will queue in the heat. I will queue in the humidity. Just do that one thing for Lee Kuan Yew. Why are we not like that with God? God, just let me do one thing for you. Just one thing. Let alone, God, you give me all these things to do, to obey you. I hope that the way Moses, by God's leading, presented and pleaded with the people about obedience, know who you obey, will begin to change, at least a starting place, how we obey, who we are obeying. By God's grace, tomorrow, then we talk about, then therefore, why we obey. Let us pray. Now, someone asked, what is the difference between psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs?
有人说诗章、颂词、灵歌有什么不同？
Someone also asked, can we just have instrumental music?
有人说我们只要乐器的音乐就行就好。
Can we worship God with instrumental music?
我们单单用乐器的音乐来敬拜神就好，可以吗？